Welcome to Healing from Within. I'm your host, Tony Valen. You can contact me, Tony at TonyValen.com, or visit our website, healingfromwithin.net. Follow the show on Twitter at TVHFW. The show is also available on iTunes and YouTube. Just search Healing from Within with Tony Valen or look for the Tony Valen channel on YouTube. Joining us on today's show is writer, editor, and presenter of Stillness in the Storm, Justin Deschamps. You can learn more about Justin by going to his blog, sitsshowblogspot.com. Like him on Facebook.com/sitsshow. Follow him on Twitter at sitsshow. He's also available on Tumblr, Pinterest, and Instagram. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tony. Great to be here.
So let's get started. The first question I always ask all my guests, what are your gifts and how did your journey begin?
Well, my journey began basically as soon as I came into this world. I've always been really interested in understanding how things worked. I have a tremendous amount of awareness and emotional receptivity for my experience. I even remember being a young child and having, when I say I had a traumatic type of emotional experience as a child, not because I was abused or anything, but just because I had so much of a huge inrush of emotional energy. You know, even just seeing somebody stub their toe or watching TV and seeing something nasty happen on TV, it gave me this huge empathy experience. I mean, I remember being a young child and seeing this TV show where this man was pretending to be an ice cream truck driver, and he pulls up and this little girl wants to buy an ice cream, and he just pulls away and she looks very sad. And I just started bursting out into tears, and my parents had to turn the TV off because I just empathized with what the child was going through at such a deep level. So because of those two things, I kind of had a natural yearning to want to understand how this all worked and how my life worked. And I was thankful to have two parents that spent a great deal of time, hours on end, just talking to me about pretty much anything I wanted to, how various things in life worked. I was really big into astronomy and science as a young child, and I had many conversations and discussions with my father about that, and mother as well. And basically because of that, I developed a really good process of understanding things at a deep intuitive level. When I went into school as a kindergartner and started to do my formal educational training, I didn't really fit into the mold. And doing the repetitive memorizing processes didn't really work for me. You know, I would spend hours just trying to memorize a few words for a spelling bee. But if I could just sit and listen with an open mind to a narrative or a story, I wouldn't even need to memorize it. It would just be like imprinted into me. Really, that drive to want to understand reality was deep in me from a young child. And I started to take notes and write things down in journals and kind of developed my own personal process for understanding something. If I had an idea that I wanted to explore, I would use journals to write things down and kind of like a self-dialogue with myself. And as a result of that, I kind of realized that gaining information wasn't just for me. I wanted to share that with other people. And I needed to do it more than just as a belief. Now, I'm really big on redefining words, so I'm going to redefine belief. You know, belief is a term, the way people usually use it, it's an absolute kind of an acceptance thing. And the way I use the word belief is an operative conclusion, meaning I have something based on my experience and the evidence I have researched, and based on that, I have a conclusion that I'm going to put forth as something that I think works. But that's always subject to change depending on more information that comes in. So if I wanted to share information with people, I needed to do it not just by telling them what I think was happening, like a label where, well, if 9/11 wasn't an inside job, it was just a bunch of hackers or hijackers. That's a belief, but there's no supportive evidence for what I'm saying. So what I needed to do is I need to provide what I think it is, but then also give the very raw data points so that people can use that information on their own and really allow it to empower them. So kind of to flash forward in my life, my awakening experience really started when I was in my late 20s. I was 27. I met Julian, and we started to have a relationship together, and he was very into documentaries and these kind of things, and we found one about the Gerson therapy, the Gerson miracle, which is a man who discovered the cure for cancer back in 1928. And at the time, I had gone through some schooling and training, so I was kind of like an acolyte of the scientific community, a very materialistic type of a thinker. I was an atheist. I didn't believe in any type of supernatural phenomenon. I certainly didn't believe that there were cures for cancer because that was against the mainstream thinking. So me being the kind of inquisitive person that I am, as I'm watching this documentary, the part of me that's receiving the information is saying, yes, this looks like it's probably true. But the other part of me that doesn't want to change and let go of the comfort zone of society that I've been in we're starting to fight each other almost, and I had a kind of like an identity crisis where I had to just plunge into research, and that's basically what I did. Is I read the Gerson book, I read a whole bunch of medical papers, I read all of the debunking evidence I could find. Basically, I kind of put myself through medical school in a miniature sense just to see whether or not this was accurate. Mm-hmm. And at the end of that process, not only did I discover that it had a profound level of accuracy to it, but obviously that made me question a whole bunch of other things in my life. And that's really where the whole journey began for me in the outward work of really wanting to understand what the heck was going on in this planet. I would definitely say I'm empathic. I'm not too much into astrology, although I've researched quite a bit of it, and I'm a double Scorpio, and they have a really big emotional capacity and empathic capacity. Looking back on my life experience, when I read things like this that get into these types of analyzations about astrological archetypes, they talk about that, and I receive a tremendous amount of data when I'm talking to somebody, when I'm looking at somebody, and how that data makes sense in my mind is something I'm still mastering. But yeah, I do receive quite a bit of information empathically.
So Stillness in the Storm, tell us about it and the purpose it serves.
Sure. Well, Stillness in the Storm is basically my attempt and my partner Julian's attempt to share our awakening experience with the world, and in doing so, hopefully empower others with practical tools for learning what the truth is and how it can empower them in their lives. It came about, basically we started our awakening journey in 2010, and we met our friend Jeremy McDonald, who had a radio show, Soul Talk Radio, and a radio station, and we'd been discussing these things for a few years. And at the beginning of 2013, he says, well, hey, why don't you guys should really have your own radio show and start to put some of this information out here. So we did that. Basically what the show was is just whatever we were researching at the time and drawing conclusions on, we would kind of put that out there, and as an attempt to engage others in a discussion, not so much to hold up this flag that we feel like people had to believe. Mm-hmm. So in doing that, we started to want to put more information in these radio shows, and just the logistical format was limited. So we said, well, you know what, why don't we create a blog? We can put as much as we want in there, and then this will be a good companion for our radio show. And then that kind of just started to take a life on of its own, because now my writing, which is something that's always been really big for me, had another venue to work through, and I started to do a lot more writing. Again, my goal was to describe some of the stuff that we've been researching in a way that people can understand. I worked a call center job 2 years before that, and this was kind of like my beta test for Stillness in the Storm, so to speak, because I kind of just put myself out there, told everybody and anybody anything they wanted to know, and I was kind of known as the crazy conspiracy guy. And I realized that, depending on who I'm talking to and where their knowledge level is and how they define the words they use, etc., the information really needs to be attenuated or changed, presented in a different way, depending on what your audience is. So really that's kind of been the the behind-the-scenes goal for Stillness in the Storm is to take a lot of these ideas that are already out there and present them in a way anybody can conceivably understand them, and then in that process they can engage in the discussion, and a whole learn, teach, learn thing happens where I'm the student as well. So that's kind of what Stillness in the Storm is.
Is Cisco and Stillness in the Storm the same thing? Because I'm also reading your blog, and I noticed that you have your Blogspot blog.
Well, basically, there's a funny story behind that. When we created Stillness in the Storm, we were just sitting in our living room. We said, well, what are we going to call the show? And I said, and it just kind of came to me in my mind, like in this flash of intuition, Stillness in the Storm. And I didn't really even know what it meant. I had been studying, over unity physics and fractals and things like that, but I hadn't really gotten too deep into it until much later. So that was kind of a little interesting synchronicity.
Yeah.
But when we went to go register the web address for the Blogspot, it had already been taken. So what we decided to do was just make it an acronym, SITS, which stands for Stillness in the Storm, and then have it the show at the end, because we were doing a Blog Talk radio show at the time. So that's why it's called SITS Show.
Got it. Okay, well that makes sense to me. I just wondered. I wonder how they put that together. Also, just want to ask, is it any particular subject that seems to be of interest to you guys, or is it just all over the place and whatever comes to mind, or where do you focus?
That is a great question. Really, we use, kind of the allegory behind Stillness in the Storm is the torus. And I don't know if you've ever seen the torus shape before, or even reviewed Nassim Haramein's work. Have you seen the Thrive movie by any chance?
I have not.
Okay. Well, here, I'll give you a quick Sunday Minute News version.
Okay.
Basically, what the torus shape is it's this shape that is all over nature. It's a donut. It's essentially what it is. So you have this ring, and when you see it in nature, like in a tornado or in a hurricane, the center of the hurricane is the eye of the hurricane, where it's very clear and sunny and there's no storm at all. Mm-hmm. But along the outer edge, there is all this activity happening. So basically what the allegory of Stillness in the Storm is kind of saying is that as we receive information from an outside of us, we haven't made sense of it yet. It's raw and unprocessed. But using the power of our consciousness to go in and analyze it and contemplate it and do a little philosophy, so to speak, we can really start to come to some understanding of what this is. So basically what we do is we use any and everything that we could potentially find in our research to talk about the central process of us understanding the truth. And then through that process, what does it do? How do we evolve as personalities and as consciousness, as spirits, whatever term you want to use? Mm-hmm. In that. So really that's kind of our central focus, is understanding who we are, what this world is, and what our purpose is, and then based off all our research, what conclusions have we drawn about those questions.
I read in your bio also that you're a physics, psychology, and spiritual student. How do you bring all this information together to present to the masses, or does it come together?
Well, to answer that question, I'll give you a little history. As I was saying before, I've always had a real big interest in understanding things at a personal level. And, to really define that well, I use the analogy, when you have personal understanding or personal knowledge, it's like the difference between following a recipe for pancakes and actually being a pastry chef. So you could follow the recipe and know that you have to put in 2 cups of flour and 1 egg, and you have to do it in this series of steps. And at the end, you're going to get your pancakes that you want. But you aren't really going to understand why you followed those steps. On the other side of the coin, if you're a pastry chef, you've probably gone through all of the training and knowledge to study each ingredient, know what the chemical properties are. So now you have a really boots on the ground understanding, and now you know the reasons why everything works the way it works. So when I was exposed to science and psychology and then religion when I was very young, because the science and psychology was something that I could understand personally more, and I had more of that reflected in myself, when I encountered these religion specifically, especially the way it was presented. Maybe if somebody had presented it in a little bit different way, I wouldn't have had such the reaction I did. But I basically had a very polarized reaction. So people were talking to me about, Jesus was going to save me, and I had to go to church every Sunday and confess my sins, and I had all these things that I had to do, but I didn't have any why as to how it all made sense. And because of that, even back then, I kind of had this idea that, well, it just sounds like a cult or a way to keep people locked in their minds and not actually give them anything to understand themselves or empower themselves. So I kind of just labeled everything that had to do with spirituality as being bupkis and not valid. And basically, I was an atheist for most of my life. As I continued going through school, I went to school for physics in college at University of Massachusetts Lowell. But before that, I had been studying my own, on my own in various different ways. I was doing these at-home courses with PBS back in the early 90s and late 90s. PBS actually had college-level courses that you could take through your TV, and I was doing a lot of that. My Saturday morning, instead of watching cartoons, I was doing that kind of stuff just because my thirst for knowledge was so big.
So how old were you at that time?
It began, it was 8th grade, so I think I was like 12 or 13.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that didn't really stop until my late or early 20s. But so my point is that even though I turned away from spirituality, I was studying a lot of science and psychology at a personal level. And when I was writing things in journals, I was, if they would talk about operant conditioning and classical conditioning, well, I would sit there and I would analyze everything in my journal, and I basically kind of regurgitated back to myself to try to understand what exactly was happening. So when I went into college, I got really heavily into physics. I studied some optics, and which optics are basically waveforms and how light and sound and everything kind of works together. And right at around this time, there was a couple things that happened in my life that will kind of give you a context of probably some other things. I had realized that I had bisexual tendencies, and because of some experiences in my childhood, I was kind of, some people in my neighborhood found out that I was attracted to some boys in my neighborhood, and as you can imagine, I became the subject of ridicule, and it really kind of caused another level of social trauma in my life. So I started to hide a part of myself from the world.
Yeah.
And because of that, I kind of created this fake identity that anytime I was around somebody, I was trying to present myself as somebody who I wasn't. So the emotional information I was getting was huge. I mean, I had a really big or an intense social anxiety back then. And I started to meet some unscrupulous people, and I started to get into, smoking weed and doing, basically I've done pretty much everything you can think of. But by the time I got into college, I started to have a really bad problem with prescription drugs. And by the time I left college, I was actually a full-blown heroin and cocaine addict. So all of this was because when I was exposed to these drugs, it allowed that emotional charge I was having about my experience to kind of get numbed, and the intensity of that was less. So I was able to be a little bit more social in social situations. And looking back after that, I kind of realized, that's probably one of the reasons why I even got into that, is because I was just very conflicted internally. After I left college, I actually left college because I had primarily because there were some issues with paperwork and my financial aid didn't go through. But simultaneous with that, I was deeply in the throes of drug addiction, and my life was just completely in chaos. And 2 years after I left college, I went down pretty much as low as you can possibly get as far as addiction is concerned. Stealing from people, lying to my family and friends, doing all the nasty things you can think about when you think about drug addiction. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, I had an amazing father and mother, and my father was moving to Florida, and he said, listen, you have an opportunity. You can come with me and try to remake your life. And despite the fact that I was deep in this addiction, I kind of knew that I knew this wasn't going to be the final course of my life. There were several friends that I had that, like, really kind of, the term that we used in the culture is we call them lifers, people who are just totally committed to the life of being an addict. And I knew that I wasn't really capable of doing that, and I needed to get out of it. And I took the time, and I spent with my father in 2004. I moved down with him. I removed myself from everybody that I knew back then, and I kind of just immersed myself in a completely different situation. And around that time, about 2 years before that, I had stopped doing as much journal writing and research, and it was just kind of a way of me to address the emotional charge that I'd been receiving this whole time. When I got to Florida in 2004, it was the total opposite. I filled probably 20 journals. Every day was just nonstop writing and self-analysis and really going within myself. And that's one of the reasons I really love that your show title is because it kind of describes the power of what you can do when you actually go within and you start to heal yourself from within. Because at the end of that year, not only had I removed this need to be for addiction, but I also really filtered through a lot of the experiences that I'd gone through in my life and got a whole bunch more understanding of who I was, like a self-psychology.
Wow.
So yeah, that was a very good experience, and despite all that, I still wasn't spiritual. But what's interesting is all of the philosophizing I had done in those journals was later going to be reflected once I finally opened my mind to spirituality. So to flash forward, I had met Julian. That was a huge transformation for me because I had went from being very introverted, not telling anybody about who I was. I met my boyfriend Julian, and he said, I really like you and everything, but I'm out, you're not, and I just don't see how this can work. And that was like the thing I needed to finally just throw myself off of the cliff, so to speak, and let that transformation to come through. And that was just a huge awakening for me as far as finally getting rid of all of these deeply limiting programs in myself that I had.
Yeah, absolutely. You found the truth within yourself. That's
Exactly.
When you let go.
Right.
You talk about setting aside ego and concepts of what's right and wrong. This is the way we will walk the path of truth as one people united to change. How can we accomplish this? Because there's many people who believe that their truth is the only truth.
Sure, that's a great question. Well, basically, one thing that I've noticed, and I've kind of been an observer of human behavior, and my own experience, of course, being the central point, is that we go the process of awakening is very reminiscent of a lot of the Masonic philosophies. And without getting too much into that, basically when we start to want to know the truth, the first thing we usually do is we just reach for a quick, easy explanation. It's like a label of truth. Oh, well, this is what this is. So it's like a very black and white type of thing, Oh, there are no cures for cancer. Okay, well, that's the truth. That's my truth now. Or, well, oh, there are cures for cancers. Okay, well, which ones are they? Oh, that's it. So basically, we because going through the awakening experience can often be very traumatic. I mean, if you think about it, just the process of accepting the fact that there's actually cures for cancer out there, but they haven't been released. They've been suppressed for over 70 years. And there's millions of people that are suffering needlessly on Earth. I mean, that's a huge reality check. So that creates this drive to really want to know what the heck is going on. Yeah. And essentially what the truth is for us in my research is it's an analog. It's not that the truth is outside of us and then we're somehow taking that and bringing it in. But what's happening is we're literally creating a version of the truth based off our experience. And because every person's experience is unique, at a very real, profound sense, everybody does have a truth that is theirs. But an analogy I like to use is, imagine there's a whole bunch of people, they're all watching a basketball game. And each person that's standing in the stadium has a different perspective on what's happening in the game. Now, their experience is completely unique, but at the same time, it's integrated and woven into everybody else's. So it's not that your particular truth is the only truth and nobody else's is right. It is equally as valid as everybody else's. And if you allow that sharing process to come through, you can start to weave these individual truths to reflect a more grander harmony. And that's really what I'm talking about when I say if we follow the path of truth. There's so many things in this world that that have been packaged into easy answers to kind of to stop that process of truth discovery. And at a very scientific level, if the truth is the objective reality, okay? Mm-hmm. Well, the objective reality includes everything that has happened in the past, everything that's happening right now, everywhere, and everything that will happen into the future. So for us, as a point of view on that truth, we're never going to have a complete picture. We're always just going to be developing like snapshots of that. And through sharing our experiences with other people and our unique perspective, we kind of pool our unique store of truth together, and we literally gain more than if we had just kept quiet and not said anything. So this is what I talk about as a process of purification of truth. Because, for example, you may have an experience where the world means a certain thing to you, and even though there's cures for cancers and everything like this, well, it's really not all that bad. The government doesn't really have any nefarious intention. Well, my experience may say something different, and by having an honest discussion about not just the beliefs, not the labels for what we think is happening, but the actual raw data points, now we can put those data points on the table and reinterpret them and contemplate them. And through doing that, now we've both gained a more complete picture of what's actually happening. And that will empower us, just like it empowered the pastry chef.
Absolutely. Tell us about the practical knowledge for the awakening. This is a lecture series discussing trust. Is that correct?
Well, truth is really the primary thing that it discusses, but trust is certainly one of those things.
Got it.
Well, essentially, practical knowledge for the awakening is my attempt to take all of the information that I've been researching, that have a pretty high degree of certainty that it's accurate, mm-hmm. and I want to present that information to people so that they can have some context, understand what's happening in the world, what does this really mean for me as somebody who's in the world, and then how can I help make things a better place. And really the central focus that I'm kind of building towards, and I've briefly touched on that, and part of that is that each of us is helping to co-create the reality that we're in. And the way that process happens is through our lens for experience. So when we're experiencing things through life, when we're first born, there's really just raw data coming in. But as we begin to go through experience, we start to make associations, and then these associations become our beliefs and our worldviews. And then eventually that guides and molds our intentions and our desires. So really, if our knowledge is inaccurate, if it's not complete, we could potentially be causing ourselves some problems. And if we look out into the world and see all the various things that most people would say, yeah, there's a problem, we need to fix this, whether it be world hunger or health conditions or debt slavery. I mean, we could talk about any number of things. How do we actually help solve the problem? Well, like I was saying before, when a lot of people start their initial journey into truth discovery, they need to have somebody to blame, because it seems like a lot of the stuff is happening to us and we're just victims. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, that is the case. But at the same time, our lack of knowledge about what's happening in the world means that we're like the unwitting pawns to somebody else. If a doctor tells you that you need to take this pill every day to be healthy, and you just believe it like the gospel, then literally at a very deep psychological level, that person's belief, the doctor's belief, because you've accepted unquestionably, that is now your belief, and their belief is controlling you. And if you don't go within to look to see if this is actually accurate, you may be causing some issues for yourself. And that's essentially what's happened on our planet, and that's what I'm trying to address with the radio series is take a lot of these big ideas that are out there all over the place in breadcrumbs and kind of assemble them into a complete picture, like a tapestry of information that somebody can start at the beginning and review that, and with that have a really good, hopefully, head start on their journey through the truth process.
Absolutely. What do you mean when you talk about natural law?
Sure. Well, natural law has many names. We could call it spiritual law or divine law or physical laws. So, but essentially what we're talking about is the immutable nature and characteristics that things go through. So the 7 principles of natural law are mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, causality, and gender. And what those are basically describing is how life in our reality works. Okay, so from a very scientific perspective, we're talking about vibration. You know, right now my voice box is projecting air through, which is causing pressure waves of vibration, which is emitted as sound waves that are being transmuted into the microphone, that are transmuted into electrical signals that are then reconverted into audio so that you can hear my voice. Well, all of that happens through a very scientific process, a very rational process. And basically what the natural laws are saying is that we, in our experience, all of these things work together to create our experience. And if we can understand them, if we can understand the rules of the game, so to speak, okay, then we'll have a really good head start on life and trying to explore who we are in this life and what do we even come here for? What is the goal? So when we talk about natural law, that's basically what we're talking about is the fundamental fabric of reality itself. And through gaining knowledge of that, just like when we gain knowledge of gravity, you know, it empowers us because now we can work with the laws of nature instead of trying to fight them and empower ourselves.
Very true. This is Tony Valen, host of Healing From Within. You can contact me, Tony at TonyValen.com. Visit our website, healingfromwithin.net. Follow the show on Twitter at TVHFW. The show is also available on iTunes and YouTube. Just search Healing From Within with Tony Valen or look for the Tony Valen channel on YouTube. We're talking to our guest, writer, editor, and presenter of Stillness in the Storm, Justin Deschamps. Justin, tell us about moving to Morocco, or should I say the Kingdom of Morocco. Out of all the places you could have chosen, why Morocco?
Well, let's see. Basically, the preamble to why we came out here is because in late 2012, there was a series of UCC filings, which is the Uniform Commercial Code, is where contracts are actually registered in an international setting. And this has been the platform where if you want to let somebody know that you're making a claim on something or that something has happened with the contractual agreement that you've had, that this is a formal way to do that. And at the time, I had really just a very loose framework of understanding of what laws and contracts were. I actually thought at the time that it was all just the invention of our would-be masters, and it had no real meaning within reality. But when I actually started to go in and to study the contractual framework of reality, so equity law, trust law, legal codes, statutes, I realized that all of this stuff was framed around the natural laws themselves. And basically what these filings were was letting the people who have claimed ownership of us, and this goes all the way back to the Vatican and the Roman Curia from the really about the mid-millennium, last millennium, so around 1300 to 1500, there was a series of papal bulls that were declaring literally the ownership of all life on Earth in perpetuity of our minds, bodies, and souls. And this, it seems like, well, who cares what somebody wrote on a piece of paper back then, but the actual framework of how corporations are developed, how governments are developed, and how they treat the people all are sourced back to this claim that we are incompetent and that we can't manage our own lives, so that we need government and authority to come in and tell us how to live because we can't do it ourselves. And this part part of a research that this group, the One People's Public Trust, did was to figure out what that was, and then once they figured it out, they realized that all that needed to be done was to make a formal statement to these powers saying the people are no longer incompetent. We're going to take back our lives, and you've served your purpose, but we don't need you anymore. And that was a huge buzz in the awakening community at the time. Mm-hmm. And we kind of started the blog with that momentum because there was a lot of understanding that we were developing about a bunch of things that we've been researching. Flash to the end of 2013, a group that had been talking about these ideas for about a year decided that they wanted to come together in a place, in physicality, and actually try to create a sustainable community. A community that was independent from the control systems, but something that could serve as an example for others, because really at a profound level, modern society is a giant dependency system. We're dependent on the people who give us food. We're dependent on the medical industry. We're dependent on all of these various systems because we don't have enough internal knowledge within ourselves to be interdependent. So we wanted to try to set an example for that, and we came here to basically do that. One of the reasons why is Morocco is a very special place within the Black Book section of the world. So basically all of the commerce that happens behind the scenes, where citizens of government of nations are literally traded as paper or chattel paper. Morocco is a central place for a lot of that energy to be transferred off-world, according to the person who did this research, Heather Ann Tucci-Giraffe. So she suggested that we come here, and in doing this, we'll kind of create a place that could potentially be used for other people to learn from our example. And instead of waiting for somebody to come save us, we were going to be the change, basically. And that's why we came to Morocco. And it didn't end up going the way we wanted. Not to say that it wasn't a very rewarding and an educating experience, but basically we lost cohesion, and we kind of all went our separate ways by the end of summer this past year in 2014. And that's basically why Julian and I, are in Morocco.
Absolutely. And how long do you all plan? How much longer do you plan to be in Morocco?
Well, as a matter of fact, we had a fundraiser that we to try to go back for several reasons. And we are now presently headed back. We're flying tomorrow, believe it or not, and we will be back on Wednesday. Somebody was kind enough to lend us some money to get back out there. So if you're listening to the show and you haven't contributed and you feel like you want to, we could definitely appreciate your support, which you can do that on our blog, which is sitsshow.blogspot.com. And our kind of intention is, right now, the United States is really a big hotspot for a lot of different things. The awakening process that has been happening out there is really ramped up. I actually just posted an article yesterday that 2% of the American population trusts media, which is completely abysmal. And from a media perspective, but from an awakening perspective, it's amazing, because now people are really, hopefully at a general sense, wanting to understand a little bit more about what's really going on. And with that knowledge, we can actually start to take actions to put an end to some of these really deleterious systems that have plagued our lives for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And then speaking of that, there was an incident that happened when your Facebook was blocked. What was that about? Can you tell us what that was about?
Sure. Well, basically, the research that we cover, there's really no topic that's taboo. And when we share information, it's kind of interesting to see some of the reactions, because a lot of people assume that if you're sharing something, it must be because you believe it absolutely. Yeah. Which, as I've been mentioning, that's not something that we do. We share information for various reasons, and including so-called disinformation. But anyway, so a researcher, David Wilcock, he recently had a talk, and there's been a lot of information that he's been covering about the extraterrestrials who have been guardianing the Earth in this dark time of transition for many thousands of years. And this point in history, is a big transitional time, not just for things that are spoken of in channelings and extraterrestrials, but even when you look into the legal system and law, and you study some of these prophecies that our would-be masters believe. I mean, there's a whole bunch of nexus points that are all coming together at this time in history. Mm-hmm. And part of what I do is to share the information, the kind of the nuts and bolts information. So David had basically put together this narrative about the history of our planet going back about 240,000 years, the various ET races that have been coming in contact with us, what their intentions were, and what it really meant for us. And what we had done is we had taken a series of notes and presented that information and then tried to do it in a cohesive way for understanding. And when we put that on the internet, as soon as we put it on the internet, within 30 minutes of us putting it out there, our entire blog got blocked off of Facebook. So we've heard rumors of people's information being censored, and I've definitely seen part of it. There's a few blog posts that we put out there, one about chemtrails or geoengineering, and that got ripped off of Facebook. So I know they do these things. And that had happened very quickly. I actually think it may have been more to do with the Facebook security system that they just recently put online. But we were hearing other reports that other people who share quote-unquote conspiracy information had also had a bunch of their information being pulled off of Facebook. That kind of added a little more sensationalism to the information that we were putting out.
And what are your thoughts? Do you believe in what David was talking about, or what's your opinion? I guess not your belief, your opinion.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I like to do a lot of companion research. So David had his narrative, basically, just to get everybody up to speed on what we're talking about here. He believes that there's going to be an energetic ascension on the Earth within the next few years. He was more known for it back in 2012 when it was really popular. It didn't happen in the time frame that he had originally predicted, but as the same body of information that is used to support this idea is still valid, and part of that is the energetic synchronization process. So this is something I spend a lot of time talking about on my Practical Knowledge for the Awakening series. And I don't know, Tony, if you've heard of this before, but the example that I'm going to use is metronome synchronizing. So if you take two metronomes and you place them on a flat surface, like a table, if they're beating in different rhythms, they won't necessarily start to synchronize with each other. But if you take those metronomes and you place them on a board that allows their motions to transfer to each other, well, over the course of about a minute, they're actually going to start to synchronize. And what this process is actually called entrainment. And it's something that's deeply embedded in almost all aspects of reality. It's something that's in vibrational physics or waveform physics. So I studied this same type of information when I was in school about 10 years ago. And essentially what it means is that the organized level of energy that is enveloping the Earth and solar system, which from one perspective is electromagnetic. So the sun is basically shooting electromagnetic energy in the form of light and highly charged particles onto the Earth. And then those particles create a resonance on the Earth. It's called the Schumann resonance. And that Schumann resonance is a harmonic for our bodies. So our bodies, and the way that they're created and the way that our minds, our brain waves actually work, is embedded in that Schumann resonance. So from a very scientific perspective, what that means is that when more energy comes in to the solar system, that is going to have a direct effect on us. And that's essentially what he's talking about, that the extraterrestrials that are coming to our planet and have been coming, there's two basic groups. There's the positive extraterrestrials that are here to try to help humanity prepare for this event. Okay, because once it happens, it's going to be a huge expansion of our awareness, and a lot of the things that we've tried to hide away from ourselves are that those processes internally are just going to break down, and we're going to have like a really big reality check, much like I was talking about before with discovering cures for cancer. Something that we think is true is going to be the illusion of that's going to get dispelled. The other side of it are the other ETs, are the negative ETs, and these negative ETs have lost the ability to evolve. through their DNA and conscious activation. So essentially one data point that I've been able to confirm is that who we are and how we understand the world is going to create our emotional responsiveness. So if we are really locked into limiting beliefs, the world's going to feel very deterministic. And if we're out of that, if we're in a more open framework, it's going to feel more blissful and more empowering. And when we do that, it activates our ascension or our evolution. And there's a whole series of ETs that have lost that ability. And that's why they're here, is they're trying to kind of piggyback off of us. So David put forth this information that these events are happening right now, that the positive ETs have contacted the so-called Illuminati or the Cabal and have told them that you have to disclose the truth to humanity before the end of this year, early next year, or we're going to do it for you, because ascension is coming and the people need to know as preparation for that.
That's so interesting. And, and to put it in much, how do I say it, layman's terms or just everyday talk, for me, for what I'm thinking is that you talk about all this stuff, and I have to tell you that when I first started my show, it was about healing and how people use different gifts, psychics and mediums, and all about intuitiveness and energy and, learning from each other and discovering new worlds and whatever. And what I was jokingly talk with my friends is I say, it seems like I hit this level of crazy, and every time I hit a level of crazy, there's yet another level of crazier. And it's amazing to me, and I'm just amazed. But let me ask you more specifically, just because I hear you tell me all this information, and I think it's wonderful, and I think you're very informative. But what are your thoughts on all this? Do you really think psychics, mediums, and ETs, and ascension, and all this coming, all this that's coming is something that you find to be true? What have you really thought of through all your research?
Sure. Well, one thing that's interesting is, and it's kind of a belief I had as a young child, and then I kind of lost it through my interaction with the world, and then rediscovered it through my spiritual reawakening, so to speak, is that really everything happens for a reason. And when I finally started to open myself up to these ideas of an energetic ascension, psychics, astrology, all of the stuff that people would probably label as, paranormal or that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. There's a huge scientific basis for this, and that principle of entrainment is really the key concept. But basically, is to kind of answer your question more directly. Out of all the research I've done, it all points to the same point, which is that we're all connected at a fundamental level. And really, when we do the inner work, when we do that inner healing within ourselves, and this is what the Hermeticists call building the temple within, building our temple of Solomon within ourselves, mm-hmm. then we really start to activate a lot of these the psychic or ascended abilities that we've been hearing about, and things that seem to not make sense in one perspective. Usually, if you can find the other piece of information that relates to it, it's going to make it all make sense. And in my opinion, based off all the research I've done, this energetic activation or this energetic ascension is absolutely happening. There's very hard scientific data that we can point to confirm this. And then from a logical understanding or an actual or personal understanding, we know that when we see the truth, it empowers us. An example I like to give, just to kind of sum things up, is that when you haven't learned how to read, it almost seems like words are a completely abstract thing. You can't even really make sense of them. Mm-hmm. But as you begin to slowly condition and understand what the word means and build an association to it, now eventually it just becomes like magic. You can just see the words and they just pop into your mind. So psychics or energy healers, what they have developed is an internal mechanism of visualization using the imagination to create an analog for what's out there in the world, so that they can use the energy in the universe, especially their emotional energy, to direct that into something, an intention or a working. And that's really when we talk about energy healing, that's kind of like a person-to-person level.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we talk about the earth, then we're talking about a big, grand level. And all of that healing modality, what we're talking about is a restructuralization, or taking something that is chaotic. Like if you think about the Dr. Emoto experiments, mm-hmm. water can be in a chaotic state, but if you play a certain kind of music that is in harmony, it makes this beautiful kind of snowflake shape. And that's basically what I would describe that healing or the ascension mechanism is doing. It's the same two words for the same idea, which is coherence, or making something more organized.
Absolutely, yeah. I feel like as a people, or as humans, we started out in the right brain, shifted over to the left brain, and now we're getting ready to go back into right brain, to blissful. And I hope that is true, that we were able to find a peace and a connection with each other to ascend, like we just talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I'll touch on is that idea of the divine feminine, which in natural law, when we talk about the feminine, the masculine aspects of themselves, mm-hmm. the masculine is the conscious mind, and the feminine is the unconscious. And for those who don't know about the psychology, the unconscious, it's amazing in the sense that it will receive all of the information. So even if you don't think you're paying attention to something, your unconscious feminine aspect is receiving it anyway. So when we transition into this more divine feminine unified aspect of ourselves, we're going to be less egotistical. We're going to be less trying to focus on what we want, and instead focus on what's already around us and harmonize ourselves with the beauty and the nature that's all around us. And I think that sounds wonderful to me. I don't know about you.
Oh, absolutely. I'm waiting. So tell me, what's next for Justin? What do you plan?
Sure. Well, we're as I said, we're going to go back to the United States. Part of that is to replace some of the faded electronics and things that we have, so we can keep doing the work that we've been doing.
And where will you guys be going specifically?
Specifically, we are going to New England. I grew up in a town called Reading, Massachusetts, and we're going to be in Harvard, Massachusetts. That's where my mother lives right now, so we're going to stay with her for a little bit.
Awesome.
And then from there, we have an intention to kind of do a tour of the country, meet other people, to have discussions, and I actually want to start doing seminars or lecture series, so we can engage more people and also network with other people. So we're reaching down to somebody who maybe is just starting their awakening experience, and they're craving information, so we're going to try to give them information. But at the same time, we want to find people who have already been well on the path, or at least willing to really start to take action and be the change in this world, so that we can stop doing the things that cause problems and start doing the things that heal the planet and ourselves.
Well, that's wonderful, Justin. And if you ever want to come back on the show and talk about something else, I would love to have you back.
Wonderful. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much, Tony, for the opportunity.
Well, thank you. Our thanks to Justin Deschamps. He is a writer and editor and presenter of Stillness in the Storm. You can learn more about Justin by going to his blog, sitshowblogspot.com, like him on facebook.com/sitsshow. Follow him on Twitter @sitsshow. He's also available on Tumblr, Pinterest, and Instagram. You're listening to Healing from Within with Tony Valen here on Blog Talk Radio, airing Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central. Visit our website, healingfromwithin.net. Contact me directly, tony@tonyvalen.com. Please follow the show on Twitter @TVHFW. The show is also available on iTunes and YouTube. Just search for Healing from Within with Tony Valen, or look for the Tony Valen channel on YouTube. Thank you so much, and love and light from all of us here at Healing from Within.